Hi guys, happy Wednesday. We are here for another wedding planning powwow and I'm super pumped as always. But this week I'm going to be talking with Alex from Summit and Sage. She's literally amazing. She's a graphic designer and a wedding stationer and her work is just outright amazing. So I'm really pumped to talk with her. So I'm going to bring her on here so you guys can chat with her with me. See.
Hi.
How are you?
Good. This is my first Instagram live. I've never done this.
Oh my gosh. Yay. Oh, I'm so glad. It's so fun. It's so easy. I had never done it before doing these, and then after I was like, that's really fun. I like this. So how are you? How is everything?
Good. I'm already in my pajamas with a glass of wine.
I like it. I like your style. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.
I'm excited.
Can I have you just start by introducing yourself, share a little bit about what you do, just in case people don't already know you, and how you got started.
Yeah. Well, I'm Alex Seiden, and my company is Summit and Sage. I'm a graphic designer, and I do a little bit of everything, but I really focus on stationery, specifically wedding invitations. So I always loved art. I always knew I wanted to be an artist, but it's kind of been a journey to get to this point. The first time I ever mentioned wanting to do anything involving stationery was, I think it was 8 years ago at this point. I went to JMU, go Dukes, and I had a professor who owned a paper goods and stationery shop in Charlottesville, Virginia. So she did that on top of teaching.
So cool.
So I went and shadowed her and interned with her a little bit, and I got my hands on some projects. And I was driving back to campus one day, and I called my parents, and I was like, event branding, this is what I want to do one day. And they were like, okay, cool, and probably totally forgot about it until I think I mentioned it recently. But and then life kind of got in the way. I graduated. I went to New York City, like a lot of people do, just because that's where the opportunity was. I worked in fashion for a little while, doing print and textile design. And then I missed graphic design, so I went to a marketing firm. And then I realized I missed textile design and art. And it wasn't until I got engaged and it came time to do my own save the dates that I kind of, I guess, realized that stationery was the mix of all of these things. Wherever I was, I felt like I was missing something. I was kind of, something wasn't right. And so yeah, that's where I kind of put it all together. I did my save the dates, and I kind of just set up a flat lay and took some photos and posted them on Instagram. And then a few people started reaching out, this is cool, can you do mine? And it sort of just snowballed from there.
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
And your save the dates are beautiful. I'm obsessed. And
Thank
also, we'll get to it, but your bridal shower invitations.
Those are fun.
Oh my gosh, I love it. So good. But that's awesome. Yeah, I feel like a lot of times it just I don't know, it just takes some time to really end up where is right. And but doing all those different things, I feel is part of what makes you so good with the stationery, because you have that experience with fashion and graphic design and just all of these things.
Yeah,
so,
I wouldn't be ready to do what I'm doing now if I didn't take the steps I did beforehand. So yeah, it worked out.
I love it. That's awesome. Yay. Well, I guess I'll just start going through some of the questions that I have for you, and we'll just go from there. Awesome. So for a bride who is looking for wedding stationery, what are the different kinds of things that you need or should be thinking about aside from just the invitation?
Other paper goods and things you might want. Well, so first of all, your save the dates, and then your invitations. And then there's a lot of things for the day of, signage. I mean, you could use signage for a lot of different things. Ceremony programs, um, escort cards and escort card displays, place cards, um, table numbers, or sometimes people do table names and like give their tables names instead of using numbers. Menus. If you're doing like a buffet or you have a dessert buffet, like doing labels for the individual items and, you know, stuff like that. And then after your wedding, like you can, you know, use a lot of elements from your invitations and whatnot for thank you cards. I'm trying to think.
That's a lot. I feel like those are things that's cool though, because having kind of like all those pieces, like those are things that I normally like would think about as like just entirely separate things instead of like, okay, this is like all wedding stationery.
Right. I'm also like, a lot of people do like napkins that have either their monogram on them.
Oh, wow.
Or for our wedding, I'm doing napkins with trivia questions.
Oh my gosh, that's so fun.
Your like guest books. Some people do welcome bags, especially for destination weddings. Yeah. There's so many. You can go as far as you want to.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's so much. And I feel like it's easy just like thinking about like wedding stationery. It's like, oh, it's like the invitation. It's like there's like a whole lot of other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. So what would you say are like some of the benefits to working with a stationery designer as opposed to just like ordering something off of like Minted?
So a lot of things. I mean, I know I'm biased, but when I first started doing this, I took a lot of time and it was a lot of research to figure out everything about the post office is a very confusing place. Learning about different paper types and printing methods and why they cost what they do. A lot of this I just had to do to like avoid making expensive mistakes on behalf of my clients and like having to pay out of pocket to fix it. I mean, even if that were to happen now, I wouldn't tell you. I'd just fix it. But a lot of years of experience and time has gone into this. Planning a wedding is already pretty exhausting and stressful. I mean, if it's not in the beginning, it will be eventually. Especially like those last couple weeks and days. This is a really crazy process that you've never really prepared for before, and knock on wood, like you'll never go through it again. So a stationer is there to use their knowledge and their skills to at least take some of that burden from you and make it a little easier and fun, because this should be really fun. This whole process should be. I mean, one thing, my heart drops a little bit every single time I hear someone say like, this is just a piece of paper, or, you know, won't it just get thrown in the trash? Or, you know, why would I spend so much money on a stack of papers? And I mean, we got to change that. We need to change the dialogue around wedding invitations, because this is a lot more than just a stack of papers. And I mean, the entire point of your invitations is to give your guests like this glimpse into what they can expect from your wedding. It's kind of like, I like to call it the map to your wedding. I mean, you might be able to get a bang for your buck on a ready-to-made website like Minted or Zazzle or something like that. But I mean, is it really going to set the mood for your wedding accurately and capture the essence of you and your fiance? Probably not, because it wasn't made with you in mind. And I mean, as brides or grooms, we spend a lot of time and money curating every single detail of our wedding day. And I feel like we kind of dismiss invitations and save the dates because they're not a part of the actual day in and of themselves. But I mean, in reality, they're the only piece of information your guests are going to get before they show up there. I mean, we kind of take it for granted when we're planning a wedding, and like day in and day out, we're just immersed in everything wedding. And unless someone's planning with you or you're talking to them every day and kind of giving them a play-by-play, like they have no idea what's going on. And I mean, a lot of people really don't think about it that way. So it's a way to give people kind of like a peek into what you've been working so long and hard on. And, you know, it gets people excited. And so your invitations are kind of a map to your wedding. They should also kind of tell your story. I love stories. I love hearing them, telling them. I love reading and writing. And my favorite part of this process is hearing my couple's stories, like understanding their love story and branding their stationery just for them. Like, I want to know how you met, like how he or she proposed, like what makes you unique, and what's going to make your wedding feel like you. I mean, I send it like kind of an open-ended questionnaire to get that information, but I use a lot of that to then make custom art, which is something you'll only get with custom wedding stationery. And that can be like monograms or crests, custom maps or portraits, venue paintings and sketches. And in and of themselves, these are kind of pieces of art. These are things a lot of people I've seen even, you know, frame and keep in their own homes, like long after their wedding is over, which is something that's really special. And then, I mean, I had already mentioned, like, a lot of these custom art pieces can then be used not just on your invitations, but in your wedding in other ways. Napkins, koozies, like there's so many things that you can then, you know, carry these elements through. I mean, and then when you think about it that way, like, it's not just a stack of paper, it's a story, it's a map, it's a keepsake, and it's a piece of art. And that's, you know,
I think that's really awesome too, just like the way that you like care about your couple's stories. And like for me, like that's huge, and I feel like in so many ways, like that should apply across the board with like wedding vendors in general. Like this is like one of the biggest days of your story, and like being able to like work with people who like really value that and like care about that and want to bring that into your day is like amazing.
Yeah, totally.
That's awesome. I think somebody asked a question.
Same.
Just Abby Joy. She said, Alex, hi. How did you find your style and stick to it and not feel overwhelmed by the competition? I'm still in school, finding myself, but I do lean towards one certain kind.
I mean, this is something I've kind of had to keep telling myself. It's like, you can't run from your style. Like, as you create more and more and you just look at what you're doing, like, you're just kind of going to see a pattern. And this can apply to a lot of wedding planning aspects. Like, I try not to go on like Pinterest or like a lot of inspiration sites too much, because sometimes, I mean, to relate it to a wedding, you kind of start trying to like morph your style or your aesthetic into what you keep seeing because it seems trendy and it seems like what you should want. But it doesn't mean it's you. You know, you should always try and, you know, just do what feels like you. And you can't run from it. You have a style, and if you just keep creating, and I know it's the same with photography, you know, you
totally.
Yeah.
For sure. And I feel like that's a good point that you're bringing up about Pinterest. I like just met with a florist yesterday, and it's funny because it's like almost sometimes even like without even realizing it, like I'm like, oh, like you like have to do like a table garland or like what. It's like, no, you don't. You could do whatever you want, but it's just because you see things like all the time. So like having that distance from like all these inspiration things, it's like you don't need to like be sucked into like everything that's on Pinterest, because there's
it's good at first. If you have no idea what you're looking for, if you have no idea what you want, I mean, it's very helpful for me when my brides like send a board that they've, you know, been pinning things to, or we have boards that are shared. But like just for a little while, like eventually once you nail it down, like something I do is I create like a lookbook or a mood board and then a color palette, and like we really try and hone in what you're looking for. And then sometimes there's just a time to kind of stop looking. And I mean, I only am aware of this is because I was doing this for my wedding. Like I really from the beginning knew what I wanted. And the more I kept looking, I'd see a picture and think like, because I liked it, I had to find a way to incorporate it.
Right.
And you don't have to do that. Like I have brides that will send me a picture and like want to change the way their invitation looks because they saw something that they like. And it's like, but we need to go back to what we originally talked about and the mood board and the color palette, because like what you're showing me now doesn't seem like you, and it's not a reflection of everything else you're talking about for your wedding day. It just might aesthetically look nice to you, and that doesn't mean you need to use it for your wedding.
It's true, because there's so many things. There's like so many great ideas, and there's so many things, but it's like, okay, but it can't be everything that you like. Just because
it's overwhelming. It really is.
Lot.
Like Pinterest is great, but it's overwhelming.
Yeah, agreed. Let's see. What are some ways that you can make your wedding paper pieces be a representation of you and your wedding?
I mean, a lot of the stuff I already talked about, like the custom art and your monograms. I mean, you can do like different artwork using colors and patterns that would represent you, making a crest with like objects or things that are symbolic of you and your relationship. Vintage postage is another way, just because you can like curate a collection of vintage postage with, you know, colors and objects or stamps that are from places that may represent, you know, places or things that are important to you. So, you know, the little things. I mean, other ways to make your suite stand out. I mean, first of all, your main invitation, that main card, should be the star of your suite. So you should let it shine, and that is the place where you should splurge. Like that, if you have money in your budget, like put it towards the invitation. And there are other places that you can save. Like the RSVP card is a good place to try and cut back on your budget. I mean, your RSVP card is also very important because you won't know if anyone's coming without it. But true. But in terms of budget, it's a good place to save on printing, because you're going to send it to your guests and then they're going to write on it and they're going to send it right back to you. It's not something they're going to keep. So like if you're going to like letterpress your invitation suite, you do not need to do that for your RSVP card if you're trying to save. You know, you could digitally print it, but you can still make it fun. You can play with fun wording. I mean, it's the only piece in your stationery set that's kind of conversational, like it both sends and receives information. So, you know, it's a way that you're interacting with your guests. You can ask for song requests. I've seen people ask for marriage advice, you know, meals. If you're doing a destination wedding, you may have other events that you want to get a head count for. Another way to save on your RSVP is you can do a postcard to save on like the envelope and postage costs, because the postage for a postcard is a little less. They'll look a little torn up when they get back to you. Like postcards don't send well in the mail, but it doesn't matter because they're just coming to you. As long as you can read it, it's fine. I have a lot of people that have asked about doing postcards for save the dates, and I always try and kind of deter them from that, just because I've never received a postcard in the mail that like looked great when I received it. Like they can get pretty torn up, or there's like words that are smudged and I can't read them anymore. So that's not a place I would do it. But the RSVP you definitely can. What else? I don't know.
Those
Like,
are good.
that's all I got for that one.
I like that. I never even thought about, like, with the stamps, like, that could be a really fun way to, like, pull in all sorts of different, like, pieces of your story or anything like that. Because, like, in my head, it's just like, oh, yeah, like, something that matches the colors or whatever. But it could be so much more than that. It's really cool.
I love vintage postage. It's, like, my favorite thing to, like, search and shop for when I'm doing invitations, because there's so many cool things. I mean, it's expensive. It can be like 3 times the cost of regular postage, give or take. Like, it really depends on, you know, how rare they are, how old they are. Like, I have some stamps from like the early 1900s, and then some that are like, you know, early 2000s, and there's a big difference in price. But no, they're a really cool thing that you can definitely make very personal if you want to.
Yeah. That's awesome. Oh my gosh. I love it. So what is your favorite type or types of stationery to design?
I mean, like wedding invitations? Is that, yeah. I mean, no invitation that I design is even close to the same, because all of my couples are so different, which I think is why I like it so much. I mean, out of all of the different paper goods that I do, like those are definitely my favorite to do. But yeah, I mean, not for any other specific reason other than, I mean, I like designing and I like art, but I like telling these stories and trying to like portray these different couples that I'm working with. You know, it's never the same.
Yeah. And I feel like you do such a good job with it. Like, all of your stuff, like you're saying, it's like no two invitations are the same, but I still feel like you get like some of your style in everything. So it's like, oh, you're just so good. Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed.
You're too nice.
I'm in love. So good. So do you have any advice on finding a stationery designer that fits you and your style for your wedding?
Well, yeah, there's a couple ways. I mean, by word of mouth is a really great place to start. I mean, I'm sure you've gotten this too. When people know you're planning a wedding, like friends and family, every time you see them, they're asking about your wedding planning process. So it's very easy to bring stuff like this up and ask if they know anybody. And if they know you, then they probably know your style, and they may be able to, you know, point you in the direction of someone they think you would mesh well with. I mean, if you've ever received an invitation in the mail that really wowed you, I would reach out to that couple and ask, you know, who they used to do it. Your vendors, if you've already started booking vendors for your wedding, photographers, your wedding planners, florists, they work with stationers all the time. And if they're working with you, again, they probably know, you know, the vision that you have for your wedding. So they can probably point you in the direction of someone whose style would fit with yours. I mean, Pinterest is a place if you're pinning. I know we already talked about Pinterest, but I mean, almost all brides have a Pinterest board. So it's usually pretty easy to trace your pins back to the original source if like you put in a little bit of effort. And a lot of times those will go right back to like the site of the stationer or their social media page, or it's like a blog or something where they're tagged or mentioned somewhere anyway. So you can usually find them that way. And Instagram, I found a lot of my own vendors for my wedding on Instagram just because I had been following them. And I mean, we all love to hate the Instagram algorithm, but for stuff like this, it can actually be very helpful, because if you start liking pictures of stationery, ads for stationery designers and pictures of stationery will be all over your suggested page, and like you can't hide from it. So you can, the more you like those posts and follow those pages, like the more you're going to see it, and you can definitely find someone that you could potentially hire.
Definitely. It's true. It does give you like back like the same kind of content that you do like. So it is helpful for those kinds of things. So it's like,
Right.
okay, like now I'm finding more things like this. So it's helpful, but yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah, some ways.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. So how far out would you recommend starting the design process for each of your stationery pieces?
I mean, I want to know your opinion on this, but like I don't really think it's rarely too early to start inquiring about things in the wedding planning process. I mean, I feel like people are like earlier and earlier starting to plan their weddings. Like people sometimes spend more than 2 years planning their weddings. So reach out as soon as you can. I mean, I'd say I usually sign on clients like usually like 6 months before their wedding date. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's more like 8 or 9 or even 10. Like it really depends.
Mm-hmm.
Save the dates even earlier. I mean, it depends on when your wedding is. You want to send your save the dates out like I'd say 6 to 9 months before your wedding, if it's a local wedding. If it's a destination wedding, I'd say a year would be ideal, just because there's a lot of planning that your guests have to do to get there. But the farther away your wedding is from your guests, the earlier you should be sending your save the date. Even if like 100% of your logistics aren't figured out yet, which they probably aren't, you really just need your names, the date, and like a location, like a city. And
Right.
I mean, if you have a wedding website, like the URL would be very helpful. Even if you don't have your site set up, like just get the URL and like put a big coming soon and like just put it on the save the date so people know it's there.
Mm-hmm.
Also, everyone who gets a save the date should get an invitation. Even if you know they aren't coming, they should definitely still get an invitation. And then, so for invitations, those need to be sent out like 8 to 10 weeks before your wedding, like two-ish months. And then for a destination wedding, like 3 to 4 months is good. I mean, if you send out a save the date with enough time, if you have a wedding website with a lot of information, like 3 months is fine. It just depends. In terms of design for mostly for invitations, I like to allow at least 2 months for design and production. Because it can take, if you're doing anything like specialty printing, like letterpress or, foil stamping, some of that can take, weeks between, when the files get sent, when they're produced, and then they're sent back to me. But I spend like 3 months from beginning to end on that process. Ideally 3 months.
Yeah.
But I mean, it just depends.
Yeah. And then, so like for other pieces, like if you also wanted to do like menus and like place cards and stuff like that, would you like start that around the same time as you're like designing invitations, or is that like another process, or how do you kind of handle the mold?
That totally depends. I mean, I usually try and ask during this process and when we're wrapping up the invitations if they plan on needing anything like that. Did you see Chris in the background?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be discreet.
Hi, Chris.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Oh, God.
I love it.
That like kind of startled me. I didn't even know he was home. He just got home. In front of the whole world, Chris. Anyway. No, for stuff like that, it totally depends. But usually, I mean, after I wrap up your invitation, I just start working on that stuff if I know you need it. I mean, like escort cards and place cards and stuff like that, you're not going to have your final guest list right away. So that stuff has to wait. Menus, if they need to have like a specific meal choice, if you're doing like different menus for different guests that have chosen different entree options, then like all of that stuff has to wait. So as soon as you have that list and get all your RSVPs back, then like ideally I would like, you know, I would get that right away and then I would start on it. So like depending on the item, it just depends.
That's true. I forgot about that. Like, obviously, you would need your RSVPs before you can like do escort cards.
Yes.
That's like, I feel like it's like all of this stuff is like all dependent on each other, and it like happens really quick because it's, you know, once
I know. Yeah. That's why it gets so stressful at the very end. You're like, this process is so enjoyable. It's so fun. Like I want to plan weddings all the time, and then like then it takes a turn.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. So how long in advance like should people like RSVP by? Like how do you set your deadline for
that? Generally I'd say like a month is fine. A month before your wedding date. Some people do a little bit more, like sometimes even more, like a month and a half. I mean, if you're like ahead of the game getting your invitations out and you can give your guests enough time to like get the invitations and respond, then like a month and a half would be good, but it just really depends on when you're sending them out. But I generally a month before.
Okay, cool. So let's see. What are some ways that you can make your stationery stand out and include like outside the box elements, which is where I like thought about your bridal shower invitation and like your piñata envelope liners are my favorite thing on the planet. It like I am obsessed. I'm like, I want that just like in general for anything I send in the mail because I love it.
Someone else needs to have like a fiesta themed party so I can make them again because yeah. I mean, we had already touched on this before, but some like unique elements would be all of the custom art and like the vintage postage and all of that, which, you know, is just unique to you as a couple. I mean, making it stand out, you can do anything. I just engraved invitations on leather. You can print on wood. Like I did those bridal shower invitations that were screen printed on acrylic with the pressed flowers. I mean, most of the time, like if you find a piece of material, like I find a way to print on it. It's fun, you know?
I love it.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
But I mean, those ideas usually come as we're thinking about like the event and what, you know, would fit with where you're having it. Like for I engraved our wedding invitations on the leather just because we're getting married in Montana and I have a lot of like rustic leather and like, you know, copper elements, and it just kind of fit. So like that was in my head to begin with, and it was just something I was thinking of. But yeah, I mean, the world is our oyster.
Yeah, it's so true. It's like again, I guess with like I mean, not even Pinterest, but just that like you get like so in the mindset of like, oh, that's just like how it's done. You print an invitation on a piece of paper and that's it. But really, you can do whatever you want. There's no rules to it, which is cool.
Yeah.
I love it. But yeah, I feel like you always find like so many creative like little touches on all. Oh my gosh, so good, so good. It's so fun, and I feel like that's such a exciting like piece of like planning your wedding, like putting together like all of these like, you know, paper elements and like your invitation and like finding ways to like really make that like about you guys and like all this stuff.
Yeah.
So
well,
cool.
I mean, like I said, like, well, I mean, this is the real first impression of your wedding, and your guests are not in on this planning process at all, and they have no idea what's going on. So this is a way to get people really like amped up and excited for your wedding, and like, you know, really give them a good feel for what, you know, what to expect. I mean, if you were having this like really formal, like all white modern wedding, and you know, you printed your invitations on like a thin piece of cardstock at Staples, people would definitely take that like black tie attire with a grain of salt. Like it doesn't have the same pull as it would if it was like, you know, really like heavy, like nice soft cotton paper that was letter pressed and like wrapped in a gatefold with like a white wax seal. Like it's not the same.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. Oh my gosh. It makes a big difference. And just like, and you know, I know you've mentioned before, like even like the way that like you address the envelopes, like all of those like little pieces are important. Like, you know, what was that phrase you said that was so funny? Like something about a bumper sticker when I was like talking with you earlier about like invitations. Something about like a bumper sticker.
Did I say something about a bumper sticker?
Yes, you did. And it was really funny because like you were saying something about like the way that you address the envelopes because you wouldn't put a bumper sticker or something. Because like the whole presentation of the envelope is important too.
I don't know what I said.
It was so good. I could probably find it, but it was really good because it's like you can't like have these like amazing like beautiful invitations and then like you just like printed it on like Comic Sans font on your computer for your envelope or like hand wrote and it looks like crap.
Yeah, I mean, when I do my suites for my brides and grooms, I always include address printing because I've had too many people be like, I'll save money by writing the addresses on the envelopes. And I'm like, you cannot spend like a couple $1,000s on these invitations and then hand write on top of the envelopes. Like it's a package. Like this is a feeling. Like you need to like keep with it like all the way to the end. And you know, the envelope is the first thing your guests are actually going to see before they open it anyway. So it's important. Yeah. And I mean, I say this and because I'm really passionate about it, but a lot of people recognize this, but they're not conscious of it. Like people notice these little things, but they're not like saying it out loud or like acknowledging it to themselves just because it's like kind of subconscious. But like those little things like aesthetically are noticed whether people realize it or not.
It's so true. And it's like having that like whole cohesive, it's like in my mind, like I can't like rationalize like you're saying, like you're investing in creating these like beautiful pieces of like essentially artwork and then be like, well, we'll just like I'll just write on it and like send it out. It's like
exactly.
No.
Yeah.
So true. I love it.
One thing I want to, before I totally forget to say this, because I keep talking about the post office and how they like ruin our envelopes because they do a lot. And like understanding the interworkings of the United States Postal Service is probably the hardest part of everything I've had to do so far because it's very inconsistent. Like a lot of post offices have different rules, and I mean, I try and give certain advice to my brides to avoid like envelopes getting stuck in machines or things getting returned to you, or like God forbid your guests get their invitations and they get like a notice with it to pay postage because you didn't put enough on it or something like that. Like that would be mortifying in my opinion as a stationer for people to get something like that. If you are working with a stationery designer, most likely they will take care of a lot of this for you, but I have an option for some of my brides to not have me do full assembly. Like I just safely package everything and send the pieces to you, and then you finish it and you send it out. So I have tried to, you know, get together a lot of tips to help people avoid a lot of like, you know, USPS mishaps. As I'm wearing a United States Postal Service sweatshirt right now. Can we talk about that? I totally forgot. I'm like knocking on them so hard and I'm literally wearing their uniform.
Oh God, that is so funny.
I'm an imposter. Okay.
That's hilarious.
Anyway.
Oh my God.
No, but I mean, like honestly, I think a stat I read recently was like they sort like 500 million pieces of mail a day. And I know. And I mean, the post office has had a lot of budget cuts and they're understaffed. And so mistakes are kind of bound to be made. So I feel like we sort of have to take the initiative to like combat that and like do what we can to make sure that if you're spending all this money and time on these invitations, that like they get to your guests in like the best possible, you know, state that they can. First of all, things just go missing with the post office. I think it's like 3% of all mail just goes missing. Like doesn't get returned to you, just kind of like gets sucked into the black hole that is the USPS, and you'll never see them again. Or maybe like 8 years from now, like you'll get an invitation that was supposed to be delivered to you. So always order extras. Don't just order, you know, an amount of invitations for like guests that you're thinking of inviting. You definitely want to account for, you know, invites that are going to go missing. Also, your photographer should have probably like 2 full suites to photograph for your day of details.
Yes.
Some to send, if you start finding out people can't come, you're going to want extras to send to like those B-list, you know, your B-list guest list. And then some to keep for yourself, at least 1, maybe 2 as like a keepsake. So probably like 10 extras, I would say, because it would be much, much more expensive to reprint a couple than it would be to just like add a few in from the get-go. So yeah, definitely do that. But also, so for the post office, what was I even saying? I just started talking about ordering extra cards. Okay, no. Okay, I'm here. Post office. Well, every post office, I said this before, is different. I went to the post office the other day to have them give me like tell me how much it was going to be to send an envelope. And one post office told me it was going to be 70 cents. And I drove 5 minutes down the road to the next town over, and they told me it was going to be $1.30, which is a huge difference. Huge. Yes. And that's not the first time that's happened to me. So usually then I'll go to like a third and just kind of like figure out, like compare what they say to the 2 others and then pick. Yeah. But no, always go to the post office and check, especially if you're unsure of anything, like get an opinion and then get a second one. And if those are different, then get a third.
Oh my God.
I know.
That's insane.
You just got to do it. If you are mailing anything with like that's tied with ribbon, or it has a wax seal, or it's like an odd shaped envelope, like a square envelope, you need to put extra postage, because these are non-machinable items. So the post office changed their pricing in January. So I think it's like an extra 15 cents now. So like it's 55 cents to mail 1 ounce. If it's non-machinable, then it goes up to 70 cents. Most people have no idea that like if you're mailing a square envelope or like something like that, that like it would just like get returned to you because they can't send it. Or if they're sending it to someone, then they get that notice like you owe 15 cents and you don't want your guests to get something like that in the mail. Another thing is hand canceling your invitations. And I've learned that this is something a lot of people have never heard of either. So postage stamps can only be used 1 time. So when you give your mail to the post office, they send it through a machine that has this like big black stamp that stamps over your postage stamps so that like they can't be used anymore. And this machine can like do some nasty things to your envelopes, like that smudges. It just doesn't look pretty. Like sometimes envelopes get caught and they get like all wrinkled or just kind of torn, or then they get lost because they get stuck in the machine and no one tells you, and then they go missing. So what you can do is you can hand cancel your envelopes, which is instead of them going through this machine, you take like a good old-fashioned like rubber stamp and ink pad and like physically stamp over the stamps yourself. And I've heard some people say that the post office will try and charge you for this, but that's not true. They shouldn't. Because every time I go to the post office, it doesn't cost anything to do it. So if they tell you that, you should go to another post office. Um, if you've already paid that surcharge I told you about, then it should cover that anyway, so they shouldn't be saying anything. Most postal workers will not stamp them for you, so you need to do it yourself. So like just go on like at a quiet hour and take over a table and just kind of stamp away and then hand them back. I mean, it's not guaranteed that your envelopes won't see a machine through the rest of their journey to where they need to go, but it's at least one like major step that you can avoid and kind of keep them intact. I mean,
Yeah.
there's because sometimes I've sent samples to myself that I hand cancel and I get them and they've gone through a machine anyway, but most of the time they don't. And doing that, I've noticed like a lot more that, you know, I don't have as many go missing. It's worth it.
Yeah. So then they just have a stamp that you use from them to stamp it? That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
It has like the name of the town on it. So if there's like a specific place that you would want to stamp over your postage, like you could go to that post office and do it there. Like that was something that made a difference to you, because I've done that before.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So there's like so many details that you can like really customize. It's crazy.
Yes. Yeah.
So cool.
It's fun.
I love it. That's awesome. Wow. It's like so helpful. That's so much good advice. Because like, I mean, you would think it's like no big deal. You just take it to the post office, put a stamp on it, and let it go. But there's like a lot to it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then,
oh, go ahead.
Sorry. Like for things like the type of ink that you use to address it, like you must have to like test out like what goes through like the mail well and like all that kind of stuff too.
I mean, I've never really had any problems. I know red ink doesn't go through the mail well. It's something about their machines. I think it can like have an issue with red ink, which is interesting. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
And anything, because it has to be able to read the zip code. So anything that is not dark enough, like if you have like, let's say, a gray envelope and you're printing dark gray ink on it, but the dark gray ink like isn't dark enough, it may be kind of confusing for the machine to read, and it may make things difficult. So I just try and make sure that there's like enough contrast. And with your return address, there's just different ways to position that so that it doesn't get confused with the mailing address, because that can happen too. Like the machine doesn't know like what's the front and what's the back of the envelope, and like, yeah.
Oh boy.
That doesn't take a lot to like figure. I've never had any issues with that.
Yeah.
But it's something to think about.
Yeah. Wow, that's good. Yeah. I mean, I haven't mailed out all that many like elaborate things, but I've definitely had plenty of things that just like go missing or don't get where they're going, or I've had things that were supposed to come to me that like come like 3 months later, like random stuff like that. It's like,
it's crazy.
Yeah. Do you like, what's your thoughts on like the online RSVP thing instead of like mailing in an RSVP?
I mean, that's totally fine. A lot of people are doing that. I still think you should have a card with your invitation that tells people that that's where they need to go to do that. Like a separate card. I wouldn't put that on your actual invitation, because I think it could easily get overlooked.
Yeah.
It should be its own separate thing, but that's totally fine. That's another way to, you know, save on at least, you know, postage. You could print, you know, a small, even like a business card sized card to do something like that instead of printing like a full RSVP card. You know, that would also, you know, cut down on costs.
Yeah. I like had never heard of that until recently, and I was like, That's actually smart because, like, for some of the like different website, I mean, there's so many. There's like 100 billion things you can do, but like some of the websites, like where you can RSVP, and then that helps you, like, it automatically loads things for you to help make your seating chart and like all that kind of stuff. It's like, oh wow,
Right.
that's pretty nifty.
Yeah.
But
I've never had to actually do it for a wedding yet. Like, I've never had to RSVP online, and I've never had a bride that like had her guests RSVP online. No, that's not true. One time I had a bride who had people RSVP online. But yeah, I mean, but I've been seeing it done a lot.
yeah, I actually just, like, one of Ryan's best friends is getting married this July, and they just sent out their invitations, and it was an online RSVP, and I was like, oh cool, let me just do it right now from my phone. How convenient. but but then, like, I guess, like, the worry is like people who are less like tech savvy, like if they have issues like going online to RSVP and stuff.
My grandparents would not be able to figure that out. They wouldn't. I have to RSVP for them, and then it's like it kind of defeats the purpose.
Yeah. Oh man, it's true.
Yeah.
So I would love if you could share like a little bit about your wedding and how all of your planning is going, any advice that you've learned, like what it was like designing your own stationery, which is also beautiful. I love like the leather touch and like all the uniqueness that you've like kind of incorporated.
Yeah. I mean, sorry, I'm like dropping stuff all over the floor. I mean, so for our wedding, I mean, Chris and I, first of all, were like totally on the same page with everything when we first started, and we had a really good idea of what we wanted. So far this process has been very easy for us. We're having a destination wedding in Montana, and we knew that that's where we wanted to get married. By the time we got engaged, we had it narrowed down to like 2 venues. So within a couple of weeks, it was like, you know, we quickly made a choice and signed a contract and put down our deposit. The first vendor I actually booked after our venue was our photographers, just because I thought that was something that was really important. I knew that this process and that day was going to fly by, and I really wanted to find someone that was going to capture it in a way that, you know, I appreciated and had an aesthetic that, you know, I, you know, liked. They're a couple who live in Montana, but I had followed them on social media for years. Like, I think before I even met Chris, I was like, these are the people, when I get married in Montana, they are going to photograph my day. And so I reached out right away. But it was honestly kind of like that for a lot of my vendors. I just had a really like clear idea of like what I wanted this wedding to look like. So yeah, I booked our florist and our wedding planner, and these were people that I had kind of I found them on social media. So I had followed them for a little while, and I felt like I had started to know their personalities, and so I already felt like they were people that like I would mesh well with and work well with. So it was, when the time came to make that decision, it was very easy because I kind of felt like I already knew them, as weird as that sounds.
Totally.
But yeah. What else?
What's like something that you've learned through the wedding planning process that you would like give advice to somebody who's like just starting?
So I mean, one thing, and I kind of said this before, is to like stay true to yourself. Like, this is all about you. There is going to be at least one person, if not more, who has some very strong opinions or doesn't agree with what you're doing for your wedding because it's not what they would do for their wedding. And you can't let it get to you. Like, you you just kind of have to brush it off and make sure that every decision that you're making is a reflection of you as a couple and, you know, your love and what is important to you. And it doesn't really matter what anyone else thinks because they're not the ones getting married.
Right.
And that goes back to what we were saying about Pinterest. Like the more you start to see all these inspiration photos, you kind of want, like, even subconsciously, you might kind of start to mold this vision for your wedding into something that isn't really you and isn't what it should be just because it's what you keep seeing and it's what everyone else is doing. But I think the most important thing is to, keep bringing it back to that initial, like, what is important to you, what reflects you, and stick to that. Just because you're seeing something that looks cool doesn't mean you have to make it fit into your wedding day.
Right. That's good advice. Yeah, I feel like it's hard. It's definitely hard to like sift through like all of just like the stuff out there and like opinions from everywhere. And it's just like, okay, like bring it back. Let's focus it on us. Yeah.
Everyone has an opinion. Luckily, my parents, I mean, they know me very well, and they have a similar, especially my mom has a very similar taste and style to me. So she's been very helpful throughout this process, like picking things, and she's been doing like a lot of antique shopping and all of that stuff because she lives in Montana. So it's very, it's a lot easier for her than it is for me to do some of the wedding planning things. Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I make like a mood board or a lookbook and a color palette for my brides if they don't already have one, because it's really important to have that from the beginning. And that's also something, I mean, if you work with a stationer and they do this for you, that you can use throughout the rest of your wedding planning. It's not just for your stationery. Like, I'm not branding your stationery, I'm branding like you and your wedding. So it carries throughout everything.
I've even seen like where you can use like your monogram like on your wedding album. Like you like it can go through like so many things. So that's like
people use it for like Christmas cards and like it's your initials. It's not just for your wedding. You can use it until the day you die. Like I mean, you know.
And can you share a little bit about like designing your own stationery and like what that was like?
I mean, designing my own stationery was the easiest stationery I've probably ever designed, just because it was for me and I was in my own head and I knew exactly what I wanted. But I did kind of treat myself like I would a client. Like, I made my own mood board for myself and like went through all of those steps, and it was really helpful, and it's something I kept going back to because, like I said, the only reason I'm saying all of this about like Pinterest and like staying true to you is because I found myself doing it. Like, I'd see a picture and I was like, that's so cool, like I should put that on my save the date, or I should find a way to incorporate this, and I was like, no, like that's not what this is about. That does not fit in with what I had originally planned for at all, so I should just forget it. Yeah, I mean, it was a really easy but fun process. I mean, I even bought the first wedding dress I tried on. Like, I knew what I wanted.
I love it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I mean, with all of that being said, though, I'm not trying to make it seem like this process has not been stressful at all, because I mean, there are times where it can be, and I know, I mean, it feels like just yesterday we were saying like we have a year and a half until our wedding, because I mean, we had a similar timeline to you and Ryan. Like, we got engaged Christmas Eve, and then we booked our wedding for not that July, but the following July. So it was pretty much a year and a half, and it felt like at first we had so much time. Like, I booked all the big vendors, and like within the first couple months I got all of that out of the way. And then it was like kind of too soon to start doing the smaller things. So like they just kept getting pushed back, and now we're like 3 months away, and so I'm kind of jumping on things. And we actually did. I'll share this just.
Sorry, guys. We got cut off. Hold on. Once Alex pops back in, I'll add her back on and we'll continue. Let's see. Sorry, guys. Hold, please. Sorry, got cut
That
off.
was like the fastest hour of my life.
I know.
There's no warning at all.
I know. It's
Like-
just like all of a sudden, like, bye.
They need to tell you when you're getting close.
I know. I'm like, what the heck?
I'm getting to like the juicy stuff too.
I know. Love it.
No, what I was gonna say was, I mean, I'm just sharing this because like this is something you hear about like it happening to people and you never think it's gonna happen to you. I don't have like a solution for any of this, but I'll share it anyway. I did have a mishap with one of my vendors. The only one of my vendors who wasn't amazing, because all of the other ones are phenomenal. And I already feel like I'm like best friends with a lot of the people who are planning my wedding with me, which is amazing.
Yeah.
But I actually, through a recommendation, booked a woman to do our desserts, our wedding cake, and, you know, a bunch of little other things. And she, you know, gave me a contract. I paid her a deposit. And then like a couple months went by and I couldn't get a hold of her. And then like after 4 months, I tried to call and all of her phones were disconnected. Her website was no longer active. And she just like took our deposit and dipped. Yes.
Oh
Yes.
my
Like
gosh.
I said, like you hear about this happening on like
That's crazy.
Better Get the Caro. Like she's going after people who like, you know, took people's money for a wedding dress and then like closed shop. Yeah. And I mean, but this is like small town Montana. So I like was like, people have to know her. Like we have to find this woman. So yeah, I contacted like my wedding planner and my florist and like tried to get people to find her. And I guess they kind of did, but like I was still never able to get in touch with her. So it was this whole thing with like the credit card company, like trying to get this deposit back and then scrambling to try and find someone else who could like make our wedding cake and do everything else. And I mean, thankfully, because we started planning this, we were like kind of ahead of the curve. We still had some time. But like I definitely had like a couple panic attacks over this because it was like really stressful. And I just can't believe that like people actually do stuff like that.
That's crazy.
And so, yeah, that was the only thing that's obviously the worst thing that's happened and the most stressful thing that's happened. But otherwise, this has been like a really fun, enjoyable process.
What's been like your favorite part so far?
I mean, the fact that I get to marry Chris. So
Oh.
just thinking about that all the time. No, I mean, seriously. But also, I mean, my stationery, like I've always dreamed about doing that for myself. So that was really fun. Mostly though, the fact that we're getting married in Montana, which is a place that's very special to us. And most of the people that are coming have never experienced it before. So we're both really excited to like share this place that we love so much with, you know, people we care about. And, you know, it's not just going to be like the wedding day, you know, we're going to have like a lot of fun things going on, you know, with people, and we're so excited about it.
That's so fun. So are you doing like pre-wedding and post-wedding things also?
Mostly pre-wedding. Like our wedding's on a Saturday, and like Thursday and Friday we have a couple events going on, and then I think we might do like a brunch at, you know, where everyone is staying the day after. But like, you know, like a solid 4 days of things going on, and everyone's really excited, and yeah. But it's a lot to plan because it's more than just the wedding day.
Right.
So it adds to the stress.
Yeah. Have you got Do you know where you're going for your honeymoon or?
Africa. We're going to Tanzania.
Gosh,
Yeah.
how cool.
That we booked that already. I was on top of that one.
Nice. When
Yeah.
do you guys leave? Like shortly after the wedding?
We're actually waiting until November.
Nice. That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, we got to take some time off for the wedding and like,
Yeah.
I don't know about everyone else, but like a month off from work, it's just not, I can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like, I mean, for me, like that's nice because then you still have something to look forward to because like I feel like I was always like as a kid so sad every year after like Christmas was over. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like this is so depressing. Like, so, but then it's like I feel like I'm gonna feel that way after our wedding. But then like when you have something else to look forward to after that, it's like okay, well,
I agree. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah,
for sure. So someone asked what made you choose Tanzania.
Yeah.
Actually, well, so I've been to South Africa twice. I went once years ago, and then I had a sister who studied abroad there, so I went again to visit her. And I had gone on safari while I was there, and it like all these years later, I think about it all the time. It was the coolest experience I have ever had. There's nothing like it, and I mean, not to get like too deep, but like the world is changing. Like there are places where it becomes like not safe to go. Like the globe is all ever changing. The climate, everything. So I had said to Chris, like, this was the trip of a lifetime, and I think you should experience something like this. And I think if we don't do it now, we may never be able to do it.
Yeah.
Once we buy a house and like taking South Africa is just not going to be a thing that we're going to do. But because I had been to South Africa twice, I wanted to find another country we could go to and still, experience something similar, but like for me, different. And Tanzania also has a coast, so we're going to spend some time on Zanzibar. So we get like the relaxing beach kind of thing, but also the adventure of being on a safari, which for us is like a perfect combination.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
Love it. Was that like, so you've already booked your honeymoon, like was that a lot of work to plan all of that also?
Yes. I did actually have like I guess you would call it a travel agent, like we had an itinerary, like kind of just tweak it for me and put it together. But I did a lot of research up front to make sure that that's where we wanted to go and which national parks we wanted to go to and to make sure that we were staying at the right places. And there's more logistics involved in like flying to the island of Zanzibar. This is like but I wanted to get it out of the way before wedding stuff got too crazy, and then it like really got pushed on the back burner, and then like harder to book or getting filled up or getting more expensive. Like I just wanted to like kind of check it off.
Yeah, that's smart. I feel like it's an easy thing to like push off because it's just like there's so much other stuff going on that like needs attention, but yeah, that's awesome. Cool. I mean, I think that's everything. Unless anybody else had any other questions, but this was awesome.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm just looking to see if anyone else had asked any other questions. No.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this with me. This was a blast. And enjoy the home stretch of your wedding planning, and hopefully it doesn't get too crazy. Oh man. But thank you so much for all of this super helpful info. You're the best, seriously.
Of course. It's fun.
Yes. Well, thank you, Alex. Have a good rest of your night, and thank you everybody who joined us.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.